Welcome back to PJ Takes 5. Today is Tuesday, September 9th, and the Chicago Bears have finally kicked off the 2025 regular season. But we start today with a weekend recap, starting with the winners of the weekend. So we're going to go through the NFL and college football, talking about a player who won the weekend on both offense and defense, and then a team who won in their league. So starting out here with the NFL offensive winner of the week, I got quarterback Daniel Jones of the Indianapolis Colts. We all know the story. It was with the Giants, got a big extension. They didn't choose to re-sign Saquon. Saquon leaves, has a great year with the Eagles, and then in the first year after signing an extension with the Giants, they cut Jones, who goes to Minnesota for the back half of last season, gets into the quarterback rehab with Kevin O'Connell, and then this year beat out Anthony Richardson to become the starting quarterback for the Colts in Week 1. They took on the Dolphins, won 33-8, and Jones had a really strong game. 22 for 29, 272 yards, a touchdown, no picks, tacked on 26 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So we saw the flashes that he showed in that playoff season with the Giants under Daboll. There's still a lot to work with there, but definitely a little bit of a surprise. This one might end up being more about how much the Dolphins are going to struggle this year instead of how well the Colts looked, but overall, just a great way to start the season for Indianapolis, who's had a tough time starting out season strong here. It was actually the team's first win in the opening week since 2013, so over a decade where they start out the season 0-1. They were able to flip that script this year, and they also became the first team to score on every drive since at least 2000. So you think about that, not turning the ball over, just taking care of the football, marching on the field, and scoring every time you get a chance. So it was a really impressive outing for the Colts, and I think there was a lot of question marks about, did he win the competition, or did Anthony Richardson really just lose it, and was Shane Steichen, the head coach, kind of hedging his career going long term? But in the end, it looks like they picked the right guy, and the AFC South is a fairly winnable division with Houston, who struggled, and Jacksonville, who won big, and Tennessee, who struggled, but the Colts could very well be in it down the stretch here to win that division, or at least be a wild card team potentially, and if they are, Daniel Jones is a big reason for that. So heading on down to the defensive player of the week, I got Tyler Tart for the Los Angeles Chargers, D tackle. Chargers beat the Chiefs 27-21 on Friday night in Sao Paulo. He had 1 solo tackle, and he's listed with 2 pass breakups at the line, but I thought it was 3 just from my counting. And then obviously had the one memorable moment where he kind of open hand slapped Travis Kelce, and I know there was some question about whether or not that was a punch or could he get ejected or not, and he probably should have gotten ejected, honestly. Once you're hitting somebody in the helmet, does it really matter if your hand's open or closed? I don't think so, but nonetheless, he stayed in and was a big part of that defense, stopping Mahomes, getting the ball, tipped the line of scrimmage, prevented a couple plays in the red zone. If you can't get to the quarterback, get your hands up and try to disrupt the passing lane and knock it down, and he did a really good job of that. I know that's something he's found an affinity for in recent years, going back to his time in Tennessee, but that's a really effective way, especially for a bigger guy who can't really get to the passer as quickly as an edge rusher or a super athletic interior guy like Chris Jones on the other side of the lines. Really impressive stuff from him to not fill the stat sheet, but really make his presence felt on that defensive line. Going down to what team I thought won the weekend in the NFL, this one's a little controversial, but I'm going to pick the Cincinnati Bengals. They beat the Browns 17-16 in Cleveland. Burrow entered the game 3-5 versus Cleveland in his career, so they've definitely had their number on the Bengals side. But the Bengals won despite just recording 7 yards in the second half, and they were previously 1-11 in the first 2 weeks over Joe Burrow's career. So this is a game that I think a lot of people expected the Bengals to win, but the way they did it, I thought it spoke a lot to the strides they've made in recent years here, and how they can look different this year, looking to get into that playoffs and get back to the Super Bowl as they were a couple years ago. So it's never easy to win Week 1. It's never easy to beat a divisional opponent, no matter what the talent says on paper. And for them to go in on a road game and find a way to win, when last year they found so many different ways to lose, I thought was a really good sign that despite not having a super productive outing on either side of the ball, that they're a little bit more sound of a football team, and they're making some strides in the right direction to get into that playoff situation where really anything can happen. So I have them as the winner of the weekend just because they found the way to win. Going down to college here, my offensive player of the week, Byron Brown, USF quarterback. USF beat Florida 18-16. Brown had 263 passing yards on 23 completions over 36 attempts, a touchdown, no picks, and then tacked on 66 yards on the ground. So pretty productive night from him. And then leading to the upset 18-16 against number 13 ranked Florida. Obviously a big day for that program. They started out the season beating 25th ranked Boise State 34-7 in week 1 there. So 2 big wins to start the season out here, and they're now ranked 18th in the new AP poll. So he's the quarterback that's leading his team to heights that people didn't think they could reach, frankly, and they could very well end up being a playoff team if they can keep this up and stay undefeated or one loss and be that highest ranked non-Power 4 team in the playoffs. So good stuff from USF, good stuff from Brown, just trying to help his team find a way to win, and they did just that. So moving on down here to college defensive player of the week, I got Timatoa McDonough for Iowa State, defensive end. Iowa State beat Iowa. They were in-state divisional rivals 16-13 on Saturday, and McDonough had 5 total tackles and 2 sacks, and both those sacks were back-to-back plays on Iowa's final possession to keep them out of any sort of scoring opportunity. So we know Iowa usually not the best offensive team, and they were struggling to get the ball up and down the field, especially on that game-winning scenario down 3 in the fourth quarter on their final drive, and McDonough was the player that really put an end to any momentum they had and took down Gronowski a couple times and really sealed that game off. So we saw this in that Miami-Notre Dame game in week 1, but having a guy on the edge who can be a real closer at that DM position and really attack the quarterback when it's an obvious passing situation is just so important, and he did a really good job of that to secure the win for the Cyclones. So he's my defensive winner, and then the college team that I have winning of the week is Oklahoma, beating Michigan 24-13 at home. This game was pretty close, but they were able to take it out at the end, thanks in large part to a 16-play, 78-yard field goal drive that took 8.5 minutes off the clock. So by the time Michigan got the ball back, they were down 11 with about a minute left. So pretty much just drained that entire clock and got a score and made it a 2-possession game with no time on the clock. So really good stuff out of their offense there to know the situation and just churn out clock and finish that game in the right way. And then from the defensive side, they kept Bryce Underwood to 9 completions, 142 yards, and no touchdowns. You have a really phenomenal quarterback prospect coming into your home, and you make sure that he can't really do anything that he wants to do, and they did a very good job defensively of closing that game out. And then looking at the other quarterback, John Mateer for Oklahoma, really strong game, potentially a Heisman moment kind of game where he puts his name on the map for that award, 344 yards and 3 total touchdowns. So you have a good team coming in, your best player, your quarterback, it shines that entire outing and really outplays the other team. And then, like I said, you have the aforementioned game-winning drive where you just totally close it out. And top to bottom, I thought Oklahoma had a really impressive night. So they're my college winners of the week team-wise. Going down to the losers of the weekend, and I'll say before we get into this, it's going to be the same format, offense, defense, team, but for college, I'm not going to do individuals just because it feels weird to target out a specific college kid and say that he was a loser of the week. But the NFL guys get paid, so I'm not too worried about that. Looking on the offensive side, the loser of the week, I have Kenneth Walker, running back for the Seattle Seahawks. They lost to the Niners 17-13 after having a lead in that game. Walker finished with 13 touches for 24 yards. So about 1.85 yards per touch, pretty low. You want to see about 4 yards per carry at least, and his yards per carry wasn't much different than that total. So a really good back who showed a lot in the NFL already, but Zach Charbonnet, the backup running back, ended up having more carries, and he did score the lone touchdown of the game. So not a great showing from Walker, who plays offense on a team that's about defense, so you would think that running back spot would be pretty important, and just playing complementary football and churning clock out and having the defense close games. And in the end, it looked like they were a little more comfortable with Charbonnet back there. And like I said, scored the only touchdown of the game for the Seahawks. So that'll be an interesting positional battle to watch throughout the year here if Walker doesn't become that lead back, or if it becomes more of a 1-2 punch thing where he takes a back seat. So like I said, he's had good years in the NFL already, has had injury problems, he struggles to stay healthy week in and week out, but he plays running back, so he takes a lot of hits. That's not super surprising, but overall, just a little worrying to see a guy like Charbonnet, who was penciled in as the backup, come in and demand more touches, more carries, I should say, in that offense. So I have Walker as my loser of the week. NFL defensive player loser of the week was James Pierce Jr., Falcons defensive end. They lost a close game to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 23-20. Came down to a missed kick by Younghoe Koo, but in the end, Pierce, who was the 26th overall pick, a guy that Atlanta traded away a 3rd-round pick last year and a 1st-round pick this year. He finished with 0 sacks and 0 tackles and just 1 QB hit. So You have Jalen Walker that you also drafted, and you have Pierce Jr. I'm trying to fix that end spot that's plagued Atlanta for so long, and to have a really highly touted guy like Pierce come in and really not have a presence week one, even with Tristan Wirfs out, was a little disappointing to say the least. So he's a rookie. He'll definitely have opportunities to grow and develop and become more comfortable in that scheme, but was kind of expecting a little more of him week one. And yeah, it's a close game. It came down to a field goal attempt, but if you can get a little more of the defense, maybe it's not that close and you can win that game a little bit earlier for the Falcons. So disappointing night for Pierce Jr. For my NFL team that lost the weekend, I have the Carolina Panthers. Fell to the Jacksonville Jaguars 26-10. They were outgained by 123 yards. Had 1.8 yards fewer per play. Lost the turnover differential 3-1, so a -2 margin. Recorded no sacks on defense. Really just a disappointing showing from that team top to bottom. A lot of optimism about Bryce Young heading into year 3 here, parlaying off of that step that he seemed to make at the end of the last season, but the offense seemed to take a step back a little bit despite adding more weapons around him, and then defensively it was really nothing of note to talk about. I wouldn't consider the Jaguars to be a top-end offense in the NFL, but they were able to pretty much do whatever they wanted the entire game. So definitely a disappointing start to the season for the Panthers. They can grow and get back in it. I think Dave Canales is a pretty good coach, and we'll get those guys on the right path eventually. They're kind of in do-or-die time a little bit here this season, and for them to start week one off with a pretty disappointing showing was a little tough to see. And the other cool part of this game was it was the meeting of the ETN brothers, so Travis and Trevor got to play each other, did a jersey swap, signing each other's jerseys and stuff, so that was really cool, obviously despite how the game turned up to be kind of one-sided. But going down to my college team that lost the weekend, and like I said, I'm not going to do individual players, so just the team that lost the weekend, definitely Arizona State 20, losing to Mississippi State 24-20, entered the week as a 12th ranked team, a college football playoff team a year ago. Finished just 82 passing yards and allowed 279 pass yards. Did have 185 more rush yards, so they were productive on the ground, but really struggled through the air, threw 2 picks, had a -2 turnover differential. And despite sticking to the run all game, they didn't end with the win to show for it. They had about 38 minutes of time of possession and lost, which is pretty crazy to think about how long they had the ball. They controlled the game in terms of possession, but were really unable to win, obviously, and needed to do better to produce on offense, just to hang with the more competitive teams in the college football landscape. Mississippi State's a pretty good team. I think they'll end up ranked higher than an unranked team heading into the weekend, but overall just tough to see them have some of the stats that would indicate success, like a high rushing total and time possession lead, but really struggle and fall to a visiting team like that. So they're my losers of the weekend in college football. Going on to my rookie update, I have the top 5 rookies of the weekend, starting out with Emeka Egbuka, Tampa Bay receiver. Had a really strong showing in his first outing there, 4 receptions for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. Had the go-ahead touchdown to put them up at the end of the fourth quarter there, and was the last score. Would not have been if the Falcons made that field goal to tie it, but was able to cap off the day with a touchdown there to put them up. Was one of just 2 players to score 2 receiving touchdowns this weekend alongside Quentin Johnson on Friday night. So I think we all saw this coming a little bit, maybe not the production right away, but the fact that he slipped so late into that first round, and he was a really good receiver coming out of Ohio State and was kind of in that Jackson Smith and Jigba Garrett Wilson tier of a player who did a lot of good things right for the Buckeyes, and for some reason he just went past a bunch of teams, and the Buccaneers, who already have a pretty good stable of wide receivers, were able to pick him up and toss him in, really taking over that Chris Godwin role as he recovers from an injury from last season. So great showing for Egbuka, a guy who's going to become just an instant player for Baker in that offense, and could very well end up being in the Rookie of the Year conversation. So going on down here to another first-round pick, number 2, we got Tyler Warren, Colts tight end. Talked already about how strong the Colts looked, but Warren was a big part of that. Finished with 7 receptions for 76 yards. Didn't get a touchdown, but was a big part of that offense. Obviously receiving, but also decoy and chipping a little bit in the run game and pass blocking game. So really promising stuff from the guy they drafted in the first round there to bridge that gap, become a quarterback-friendly target over the middle of the field, and he pretty much did just that, finishing up with a pretty nice stat line. Number 3 here, we got running back for the Commanders, Bill Krosky-Merritt, finished with 10 rushes for 82 yards and a touchdown, including a 42-yard rush, which was his longest of the day. Entered the week listed as the team's RB4 on the website, but was essentially the RB2 this week and could very well end up taking over that RB1 spot from Austin Eckler. They traded away Brian Robinson Jr. probably for this reason, that they saw the writing on the wall that he was a really good player, a late round player that came onto the scene all at once here. But a lot of promise for the young guy as they try to build that rushing attack around Jalen Daniels. Number 4, I have Ashton Genty, Vegas running back. Was obviously one of the most highly touted players coming out of the draft. Didn't have an amazing stat line, finished 19 rushes for 38 yards and a touchdown, but was the bell cow for that team as they won. And despite the production not necessarily being there in terms of yards per carry and everything, really took on a large role within the offense and helped lead them to victory. Got the touchdown, which ended up being the deciding difference in a 7-point game, and displayed some of that toughness he showed in between the tackles. So I think he's going to have a little bit of way to go to become a true Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson type all-around player that can just carry the entire offense for you. Coming from Boise State, where he didn't face the best defenses in front sevens, but he showed a lot of promise in his debut game there, and they got him into the end zone. And with a veteran quarterback like Geno Smith back there, there's probably a lot to look forward to this running back getting put in some pretty good situations and becoming that Marshawn Lynch type runner in that Pete Carroll offense. So good to see him score, good to see him get a bulk of the carries on the offense there. And then rounding it out here, I got Cam Ward, Titans quarterback. Struggled a little bit, 12 for 28 for 112 yards. Didn't score a touchdown, didn't turn the ball over, which is very important. Did get sacked 6 times, not all of that can be put on him. Lost a relatively tight game to the Lost a relatively tight game to the Broncos, 20-12. Broncos considered to be a much better team than the Titans. Obviously, they were a playoff team last year, whereas the Titans ended up with the first overall pick. So it was a tough situation for him to go into Denver and try to win that game, but ultimately he kept the team in that game and didn't turn the ball over. So there was not a lot of talent around him to work with, but definitely some pretty optimistic things to look forward to in the future in terms of taking care of the ball, putting people in good situations, not being the reason why your team loses, but rather the reason why your team has a chance at the end. And against one of the better defenses in the NFL, I think that's a really positive thing to walk away from. So obviously got to work on not taking the sacks. I'm not saying all of them were his fault, but just kind of having the understanding of when to give up on a play and everything. 6 sacks is a lot for any quarterback, but overall, some promising stuff. And like I said earlier in the show, like I said in shows past, he's a player that we're not going to see put up the crazy numbers this year just because he doesn't really have great receivers, great tight ends. The running back, Tony Pollard, and that run game in general is okay, but there's still a lot of holes on the offense around him. So I think you're looking for things that you can walk away with and say, hey, we did this process really well. And it could very well be a situation where the Titans only win 5 games, but their fans and that team comes out of the season feeling pretty good about their future long term. So just wanted to give him a little shout despite the relatively rough weekend. And then I just want to talk a little bit about and then going down the list here, I just want to talk a little bit about the 2-point conversions we saw over the weekend. So starting with that Ravens-Bills game on Sunday night, 41-40 Bills, one of the best games we've seen in the regular season. A relatively back-and-forth game until the Bills had to come back at the end to pull out the win at home. But just kind of going through the timeline here. So Buffalo missed a 2-point attempt in the third quarter where they went down 27-19. So they had the PAT, but there was a defensive penalty, so they took it off the board and then decided to go for 2 with the half the distance to the goal penalty and missed it. And then they missed again in the fourth, and they missed the 2-point conversion attempt again in the fourth quarter, down 34-25. Missed another one later in the fourth quarter, down 40-38. Would have tied the game, but couldn't get it. Obviously ended up getting the game-winning field goal in that situation where they got the ball back and marched down the field pretty quickly. But you can't really play the game of, if this would have happened and this would have happened, you wouldn't need the field goal. But at the end of the day, they could have scored 41 points without that game-winning field goal by just getting the point after attempt as they could. So definitely a little bit of a head-scratcher. Was definitely a little bit of a head scratcher in terms of some of the decision making to be constantly chasing that 2-point attempt to cut the lead a little bit. I'm sure that's something they'll review and Sean McDermott will look at and see if he can't do a little better in that decision making. But to go 0-for-3 in 2-point attempts was definitely a problem that they'll need to address going forward because they're going to find themselves in close games against the Ravens, if they see them again, the Bengals, who are one of the better teams, the Chargers, the Chiefs, all these top-end teams that they're slated to see this year or in the postseason, they're going to be high-scoring, competitive games, and they need to be a little cleaner in some of the operation going forward to give themselves a really good shot to win that Super Bowl in the last season of that old stadium. I know they were talking about that a lot on Sunday night. In the other game, the two-point conversion attempts were really prevalent, was that Steelers win versus the Jets. So, similar situation, the Jets missed the PAT in the first, but then there was a penalty on the defense, so they got the half the distance to the goal, and ended up going for 2 from the 1 and missed it. So they were up 9-7 instead of 10-7 or 11-7. And then later in the game in the fourth quarter, they missed a 2-point attempt to go up 32-31, so they would have been up 34-31, a 3-point game, which would have made Chris Boswell's eventual game-winning kick only to tie the game. But again, it's hard to play that hypothetical game just because the timeline changes a little bit there. This one wasn't as egregious as the Bills one was, just because even though they lost in the end, they weren't chasing it throughout the entire second half of that game. But another one where just take what you can early. If you miss the PAT and there's a defensive penalty, consider that to be the bailout and just get the one on the board from an easier kick and re-kick it, because if a kicker misses a PAT, he's probably not going to miss a second one. I mean, these guys are really good players and true professionals. So, I know the Jets want to be a really aggressive team with Aaron Glenn and that run game and everything, but the identity should be smart football, and I think taking the one there early would have helped them up throughout the game to make that a little bit more of a friendly scoring situation so that they could have potentially come out with that win in a game that they almost won, obviously just failing on that fourth down conversion pretty late in the game there. But I just have a couple notes on the 2-point attempts in general. So, when you're trailing a team and you need to get to 2-point at some point, I'm just such an advocate for delaying that attempt for as long as possible, because say you're down 15 and you need another touchdown and a 2-point conversion. If you score that first touchdown and go for 2, you're still down 9 if you miss it. And so you have a touchdown drive, everyone's really excited about that, and then you miss for 2, and it just feels on the sideline like you guys failed in your goal there. So it can really deflate your own team and your own momentum if you miss that too early. And especially for the home teams, both those teams, the Bills and the Jets, were at home. You have to know that going for 2 at the end, you might only tie the game in regulation, but going to overtime at home is so much better than going to overtime on the road, even if you're facing Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson, 2 of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. So, for those two, I was a little confused about why they were chasing it so much, just because the other side that you never know what's going to happen. You know, you could be down 10-9 and then you score the next 17 points, and suddenly going for 2 doesn't really matter as much. So, definitely a little disappointing from those teams. The other part that I'm a little confused about rule-wise, that I think we're going to see a change eventually. It seems like the offenses get punished more if a team on the defensive side of a PAT gets a penalty. So we saw in both these games where a team went for the 1 defensive penalty and they decided to restack it and go for 2, because it takes the ball from the 2-yard line to the 1-yard line, so you think we can just run and get 1 yard. But the other side would be to enforce the penalty on the kickoff, which puts the ball, I believe, at the 50-yard line on the kickoff. But with the new kickoff rules, if you kick it through the back of the end zone, the opposing team only gets at the 35. So you're only doing a 15-yard kick, essentially. So they need to find a way to penalize the defenses that commit a penalty on PATs. It could be something like, if that penalty situation is going on, then the opposing offense automatically gets the ball at the 20-yard line to start the next drive. Just put them at a disadvantage. Or you do a thing where you return the ball, but wherever you are, you start 1st and 15. They'll have to look at the rules and probably change that going forward, because it's just a weird, non-competitive advantage thing where the team that doesn't commit the penalty actually ends up kind of in a worse spot because the other team did commit a penalty. So just something that I'd like to see the NFL change before next season, just to make that a little simpler. But that's all I have for my soapbox little segment there about the 2-point conversions. Just some confusing stuff that felt kind of non-traditional to football. And then going down here to what I have called the Monday Night Football time capsule. So a little bit of a weird show today. I put these out on Tuesdays, and I usually want to film them right after Monday Night Football to talk about that game, but I'm actually filming earlier on Monday because I'm going to the game, Bears-Vikings on Monday night, so I won't be able to film when I get back, just because it'll be super late. So just wanted to do some predictions for Monday Night Football, and hopefully I'm right, but if I'm not, it'll be fun to watch back on Tuesday and kind of have the egg on my face about how wrong I was potentially. So that's the situation we're in. I would love to talk about this game after the fact, but that's just not the reality today. So going forward, Fridays and Tuesdays, I'll be able to talk about that game that just happened the night before. But like I said, today is going to be a little different. So starting with the Bears offense, I think they should look pretty clean. I want Ben Johnson to kind of set up that group and Caleb Williams specifically to have easy reads and easy decisions and easy completions and rely on those pass catchers with the ball in their hand. See what DJ Moore, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, the running backs can do in open space, schemed up into good positions. So if it's a situation where Caleb Williams has to play like Josh Allen did on Sunday night and put the team on his back and run around and make big time throws, it's probably a little bit of a loss just because we want to ease him into the season. He's playing a good defense and make his life pretty easy and make him feel pretty good into the season here. In terms of the Bears defense, I know there's some injury concerns already. TJ Edwards, the linebacker, is listed as doubtful, and then both Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon at cornerback are listed as questionable. So these guys want to be an aggressive man blitzing team. I don't know what that looks like if two of your starting corners are out, but just like the Bears want to make Caleb Williams comfortable on offense, they want to make JJ McCarthy uncomfortable on defense. Obviously, his first start in the NFL after missing all of last year with the meniscus tear. Dennis Allen's a veteran DC, and he's seen young guys come in a lot, and hopefully this is one of those situations where he can kind of throw the kitchen sink at him and get some pressure on the D-line with unique stunts and people dropping in the coverage where you don't expect, and just showing all the things that a true NFL top-end defense is capable of pulling off schematically. So I'd like to see them get in his head and on the road see if he can't force some errors and lean on some guys where he shouldn't be doing that, and forcing balls into windows where he shouldn't be trying to do that, and just make his debut a situation where he has to go back to Minnesota and watch a lot of film to figure out what went wrong exactly. So I'm hoping the defense can be pretty sophisticated and complex against McCarthy. The Vikings, I look at their offense, obviously a really good unit. Christian Darrisaw, star left tackle, is questionable for today, and then Jordan Addison, they're really good wide receiver too, is suspended for this game, so they might not be at full force, but the big thing is I think they'll do a pretty good job of not trying to put too much pressure on McCarthy, and like I said with Williams, getting him into pretty good situations. So I expect to see a heavy dose of the run game between Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, getting those guys in space or just running downhill, but really leaning on that run game, kind of like we saw with him at Michigan. So I expect their offense to be relatively vanilla, but pretty downhill and physical. And then from their defense, we know Harrison Smith is out, did not travel with the team, so that's going to be a problem just because he's that leader and that veteran presence on the back end. I think the secondary is already kind of the weaker part of that team and that roster and that defense especially, but they'll still probably try to throw the kitchen sink at Caleb with Brian Flores back there. And interestingly, this is kind of a revenge game for Flores and Ben Johnson. So when Flores took over as head coach for the Dolphins, Ben Johnson was on staff, but Flores decided not to retain him. So I'm sure Flores wants to prove that he knows that offense, and Ben Johnson wants to prove that Flores made a mistake by not retaining him. So it should be kind of an ego match between those two play callers, but it should be a good back and forth game where both those young quarterbacks show flashes, but see a lot of different things that can ruin their night a little bit. So in terms of final score prediction, I'm going to go with Bears 27, Vikings 23. Again, this comes out Tuesday, so we'll know if that's how accurate that is or how wrong that is, but I'm really pretty comfortable with thinking that the Bears are going to pull this one out. And despite maybe being a touch less talented, you're at home on Monday Night Football, and Caleb's a little more experienced, and you're in a pretty good spot with the play calling and the head coach and everything. So hopefully that's a good way for the Bears to start the year. Obviously, there's pretty high expectations. It's the second divisional game within the NFC North after that Packers win against the Lions there at home. So hopefully the Bears can follow suit and be the NFC North home team to beat their divisional opponent. So really excited to watch the game tonight, but last night for anybody watching on Tuesday. It was a really great weekend of football. Didn't get to watch maybe quite as much as I did for some personal reasons, just hanging out with family and everything. But going forward, want to get on a little better schedule with watching a bunch of games and being able to talk about them really well. So that's all I have for today. I'm excited to watch the game tonight, like I said, and then we'll be back Friday with a preview of NFL Week 2 and that weekend of college football and some picks and everything that we've been trying to get going here. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys on Friday. Bye.